Hi, I recently read a book by Stephen Furtick called Sun Stand Still. The subtitle goes, What Happens When You Dare to Ask God for the Impossible? So he talks about audacious prayers, audacious faith, and after reading this, it has really jump started my prayer life, so to speak. And I really hope that as you read this book, you would also be blessed as much as it has blessed me. So I am going to read a small portion of it for you to help you decide whether this is something that you'd want to read or not. But I do hope that the part that I'm going to read to you would encourage you the way it has encouraged me. So I'm going to read from chapter 2 because this tells the story of Joshua, and this is basically the foundation for this entire book, Joshua's story. So here goes, chapter 2. Prayer that stops the sun. Enter Joshua, one of the great franchise players of the Old Testament. Most people with a scrap of Bible knowledge or a few days in vacation Bible school know that Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. But his epic story started long before that. Born into slavery, the fate of every Jew of his generation, Joshua grew up to experience firsthand Israel's deliverance from Egyptian oppression. On the journey to the Promised Land, he rose to a position of leadership as Moses' assistant. Then, at the very border of the Promised Land, disaster struck. When the people heard that giants and walled cities stood between them and taking possession of their destiny, they panicked. Everyone wanted to turn back. Everyone, that is, except Joshua and his friend Caleb. Maybe you know the story. Unlike the other spies, Joshua and Caleb returned from scouting the Promised Land with a message of faith, not fear. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Numbers 14:7-9. But fear won out that day. God's people did not understand that if you want to experience God's blessings, audacious faith is not optional. Even after all the miracles they'd witnessed in the desert, they still hadn't grasped that what seemed impossible for them to accomplish was exactly what God wanted to accomplish for them. 40 wasted years followed. I feel for Joshua. To my mind, 40 years of enduring the consequences of other people's bad decision would be enough to derail anybody's faith. Yet Joshua never flinched. He never gave in. He never lost sight of God's promises. And when Moses died, God chose Joshua to be his successor. Big shoes to fill. Most ordinary believers would back down, but Joshua stepped up. He launched a campaign activated by audacious faith in God's goodness and power, and Joshua changed the world in his generation. Think about it. Before Joshua took charge, God's people were migrants, living hand to mouth. Afterward, they were settlers, owners of the exceedingly good land God had promised. At this point, it would be totally understandable if you're thinking, I'm not sure I see how a Bible hero's military campaign relates to my life. My most exciting daily battles are navigating stop and go traffic at 7:30 a.m. without doing violence to anyone. On the way to a job I'd give anything to quit, and getting my kids to clean their rooms at night without any bloodshed. I feel you, but stay with me. The story God has scripted for your life isn't inferior to Joshua's or anyone else's. There's an exceedingly good land that you're meant to occupy. And as you put yourself in this story, something life-changing will begin to happen inside you. My favorite exploit in Joshua's life doesn't get nearly enough airtime, if you ask me. From every angle, the story, tucked away in Joshua 10, showcases the kind of audacity we're after. And it all hinges on a preposterous prayer. In fact, when you first hear it, you might even feel like it's insulting or irreverent. But as it turns out, our God isn't intimidated by long shot prayers. As the chapter opens, we read that 5 opposing Amorite armies were planning to attack. Having decided to strike first, Joshua led his entire army toward the Amorites on an all-night march. Sometime during that march, God spoke to Joshua. He told him, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." At dawn, the Israelites unleashed a surprise attack, and right from the beginning, the battle went well. When the enemy lines broke and the Amorites started to flee into the valley, Joshua's men chased them down, and God got personally involved. As they fled before Israel, the account reads, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky. Then, as the sun sank toward the horizon, Joshua faced a decision. The victory wasn't complete, and once it got dark, the rest of the Amorites would slip away. But Joshua was determined to fight on. Perhaps he realized that if he did not destroy the enemy now, Israel's conquest of Canaan would grind to a halt. Maybe he knew that anything less than total victory would conceal God's presence and glory. Besides, he remembered God's promise in the night. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. Most of us, even really good Christian people, would have called it a day. I've done all I can do. I've exhausted every option. I've given it all I've got. But Joshua wasn't most people. He refused to go out like that. That wasn't the way it was supposed to end. This was where his audacious faith began. Joshua sized up the situation, summoned all his available courage, and delivered one of the most gloriously unorthodox prayers in the entire Bible. O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. Now, can you see why I love this story? Joshua had the audacity to ask God to make the sun stop in the sky, to freeze time on behalf of his people. I know this proposition seems impossible to us, and it doesn't make a bit of sense scientifically. But according to Scripture, God gave Joshua exactly what he ordered. Just when the Amorites were hanging on for the cover of darkness, darkness never came. Just when they thought the curtains were about to drop on their day from hell, God came out for an encore. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. The skeptic in me has all kinds of questions. Did God actually stop the earth on its axis? Did he create some kind of substitute sun to extend daylight? In other words, what really went down here? I don't know the answers to those questions. There are other books written by much smarter people that address the practical implications of this event. But my faith is pretty simple. I choose to believe that the same God who intervened to bring his son back to life intervened on this day in history to help his people. He chose to answer Joshua's outrageous prayer. He did what only he could do. And he did it in a way that his people would never forget, in a way that we're still marveling at to this day. Besides, maybe instead of trying to figure out all the technical answers, we should be asking a more relevant question. Could it be that God intends for us to have the same kind of audacious faith, the kind of faith that dares to believe God for the impossible, as a normal way of life? With everything in me, I believe he does. I believe he still desires to make the sun stand still over the life of every believer if we'll have the audacity to ask.